For Mass Effect fans, we're in a bit of an info drought here. We've had a kind of hot and cold blog earlier in 2025. We've had a few job listings and stuff to talk about, but I want to talk about it anyways. So, my idea today is to look at all the videos I've made in the last year and use that to kind of talk about where we're at, where we might be going in the short term, and maybe where things are going in the long term with development, with BioWare's health, with the future of the Mass Effect franchise. So let's jump into it. Okay, so what you see here is the Mass Effect videos playlist on my YouTube channel. If you're watching this, I assume you're already here. If you're not subscribed, please do. I cover a lot of Mass Effect things, and that is likely not going to change anytime soon. I also talk about other stuff. Enough with that plug. This is cool. You can see all the videos I've ever made that I put into this category. So there's 174 videos I've made in roughly the last, so I guess 3 or 4 years at this point. The 415 views, let's address that for a second. That's how many times people have viewed this playlist, not the videos. My videos don't get very many views, but I just want to maybe self-consciously point out that that's not what you're seeing there. Regardless, this is where, ever since I got into the franchise, this is where I've been putting my videos. And, I'm pretty proud of it. I think I've made some good stuff in here. Let's talk about the videos I've made in the last 12 months. So if we look here, I'm actually going to skip these ones. These are from more than a year ago, roughly. The first one that I want to talk about here is my new Mass Effect brings Shepard back in a board game. So if you remember this, we're obviously not going to watch all these videos. It would take way too long. I just kind of want to summarize each one relatively quickly. So this was when they put out a trailer for the board game that came out last year. I have it. It's here in my background somewhere. It might be up there. I can't remember. I've never played it. It's way too complicated for me. I'm kind of stupid. Let's just to be straight up, at least with that stuff, I am. So I never got super into it. What I did love about it, though, I'm not aware that there was any big like lore dumps or anything like that in it, even though it was made, in combination with BioWare. But there was a trailer for it, and the trailer has voiced lines by Mark Meer as Commander Shepard, and I still to this day don't think a lot of people fully maybe recognized like that may be the last time we hear new lines officially from Commander Shepard, from Mark Meer, at least. So it was just really cool. It was a neat thing. I've talked a lot about recently, if you've been watching my other videos, about how important it is for Mass Effect to reestablish itself as a franchise, as an IP, before they release the next game and not make the mistakes that I think Dragon Age made by being irrelevant and then trying to be like, hey, we have a new game. And no one cared. At least not enough people cared. So there's my spiel on that. The board game was neat. It was a good first step of them trying to kind of get the Mass Effect franchise back out into the day-to-day conversations. This one here, the canon events or not, what Dragon Age's choices tell us about the next Mass Effect. So this, I believe, came out around the time that we found out that there weren't very many things that were going to carry over from previous Dragon Age games into the Veilguard, that it was a pretty small number of things, even though, once the game came out, we found out that, I guess, in my opinion, there was a little bit more than we originally thought. It was kind of its own game where your previous choices in other games basically didn't matter, at least in large part. So I thought that was an interesting one to go in about how and what things they could carry over from the trilogy to the next Mass Effect, and Andromeda as well, and how I personally would like them to set a lot of canon events to try to shrink down the number of possibilities so that the next game can then expand again. Because if the next game has to account for every single possible choice in all 4 games before it, it's just, I think it would be diluted and not very good. So I hope they do it better than they did in the Veilguard, but a similar approach probably wouldn't be the worst thing. Here we have the video leading up to last year's N7 Day. Obviously, at this time, we didn't know that N7 Day was going to be fairly minimal, and that's fine. And me talking about wanting to stream it and stuff like that. We'll talk about that when we get to my recap of N7 Day. This is every year I've been doing a recap of everything we've heard about the next Mass Effect game since 2020. And so here in the everything we know about Mass Effect Next, I'll probably change that to Mass Effect 5 this year. I've seen too many references to that from developers from BioWare to not call it 5 anymore. I personally hope they don't call it 5. I hope it has a subtitle and it's kind of its own thing. But for now, we'll probably call it 5. This was a 2024 edition. It's over an hour long. I'll do another one here in the next couple months for 2025, even though it's not going to be much different. If I have to be totally honest, I should probably just download that one and then tack on a little bit at the end. I'll probably do it from scratch. We'll see. Some new Mass Effect information. If I remember correctly, this was like a hiring thing or something like that. It wasn't anything that big. This may have been a discussion about the Mass Effect devs working on Veilguard, but we'll probably get to that. This here we had Mass Effect and 7-Day 2024, a quieter year. So this is where I recapped. It's somehow I got 20 minutes out of it, as well as the next one. This was the hangout stream while we all hung out and waited for them to post something, and it essentially just ended up being a picture on social media. They did also release, and we'll talk more about this, there were some cosmetics that popped up in Dragon Age the Veilguard, which had, I think, a little bit of lore, some stuff to kind of speculate on, which I did. That cosmetic thing they did with the Veilguard, when you read the little descriptions and stuff, I highly suspect that's going to be a thing that we'll look back on one day once Mass Effect 5 is out and be like, oh, that's what they were telling us. We just didn't know at the time, obviously. But yeah, the N7 Day they just basically posted like, hey, it's a light year for us. We just had the Veilguard come out. Later on, we found out that, the Mass Effect team for like a year and a half just went over to Veilguard completely. Especially recently, we found out from reporting on from Jason Schreier that the Mass Effect team kind of came in and took over and kind of sounds like they kind of butted out the leadership of Dragon Age and kind of, took over the development of the game. Sounds like that ruffled some feathers, some hard feelings about that. That's a different video. You can check out me talking about that in other videos. But yeah, so last year was a light year basically because I don't think they had time to do anything else. So we'll talk about 2025 here shortly. Then this is a video I do here and there. When will the next Mass Effect game come out? This was, I believe, the result of a poll I posted on all my social media, on YouTube, things like that, to get an idea of when people think this game is coming. As you can see, kind of in the pie chart here, it looks like a lot of people think it's pretty far off, 2028 or further. I don't know. I have no idea when this game's coming. We don't even know if it's in full production yet. I think it will hit this year if it hasn't already. I don't know. I have no clue. We just don't know. It's at least going to be, once they announce full production, I would guess 2 to 3 years later. So if that happens this year, 2 to 3 years from now, you're looking at 2027, 2028, maybe even later, depending on the scope of the game. Here's where I went into talking about the armor cosmetics that we got in the Veilguard on N7 Day in 2024. Some of the descriptions and stuff, to this day, I still think in basically every N7 Day, they've referenced Shepard directly. And I don't know if that's just for nostalgia, if they're trying to hint that they're going to be in the next game. We don't know. It's all speculation at this point. But that was, I think, my main talking point in that one. The Mass Effect 5 will be woke, and that's fine. Believe it or not, that was one that actually went over 1,000 views, which is a lot for me. And it was me basically just saying, like, yeah, like the next game is probably going to have quote unquote woke things to it. And I guess my main conversation point whenever I talk about that is that things that are considered woke are really just, being accepting of people. Like, and different viewpoints and being empathetic to other people's struggles and things like that. That shouldn't be a problem. And that was kind of my message in that video. Needless to say, many people were hidden after they made comments on that one, but that's okay. Here we had this relax, this is normal. This was me not really playing PR for BioWare, but more for my own feelings. This was, I believe, when Patrick Weeks was let go from the studio. I have some pretty complicated feelings about that. I'm not a lifetime diehard fan of BioWare back to the olden days. I'm a newer fan as of like 2021. And in hindsight, especially, my whole feeling kind of was like, uh, I don't love everything that person did necessarily in the veteran writing team in general. And we know we have a new narrative director in Mary DeMarley who did the Deus Ex games and the Guardians of the Galaxy game. I don't think it's that crazy, especially after a lot of the criticisms of the Veilguard was kind of focused around the writing and things like that. I understand the legacy of these people who were let go or who left on their own accord. I don't think it should seem all that wild that that they aren't there anymore, and that there's probably new people doing those things. I suspect that's maybe what they needed. Maybe the legacy wasn't really working anymore. That's just my kind of, low tier newbie take. There was rumors about BioWare shutting down at one point. I remember talking about that and just kind of how silly it was, especially by the people it was being pushed by. It was the kind of clickbaiter, kind of loser YouTubers and social media people. There was just no evidence behind it. It made no sense. And my whole argument boiled down to, if they were going to shut down BioWare, I suspect they would have done it before Veilguard came out and potentially like right after Anthem and Andromeda failed. They haven't. For some reason, BioWare continues to exist, and I don't think they're in as much danger as people may think they are. We'll see in the long run. This BioWare is changing. I'm happy about it. I suspect this was in the next video, the BioWare Studio update blog and news. These were, I believe the changing one was from articles that were coming out of rumors of layoffs and restructuring at the studio. And then within days, I posted another one. Let me see if it'll show me the dates. It won't. When they put out a blog, and that was Gary McKay putting out a blog, which if you've been following this for a long time, you'll know that if Gary McKay puts out a blog on the BioWare forum or on the BioWare website, it's probably not good news. If Mike Gamble does it, it probably is good news. The funny thing was, this blog was technically good news. It was them talking about how, we are focused on Mass Effect. That's our next project. That's what we're working on now after shipping the Veilguard. I think this is when we found out there wasn't going to be any Veilguard DLC and things like that. And this was following up on leaks and rumors and stuff that a bunch of BioWare developers had been temporarily moved to other studios, like EA Motive and DICE and Ripple Effect, all these, studios who are making like Iron Man and Battlefield 6 and so on. This blog confirmed that not only were those people moved temporarily, they were actually moved permanently, and that there were some layoffs as well. I believe this is when there was more narrative layoffs. I know that some of those people who were moved to those other studios have now left EA entirely. A bunch of them are still there, and I was even told at one point that the idea was that once they started full production on Mass Effect, a lot of those people would be invited back to apply to come back to BioWare. Many of them were remote workers anyway, so they weren't even really there in the first place. But regardless, like there's one person I know who has like one of the craziest resumes, has worked at some of the most premier studios doing what they do, like literally like a long history of like the best of the best, who came to BioWare to work on Mass Effect, ended up getting put on the Veilguard, and then after the Veilguard got shipped off to another studio and they left and went to another big premier studio. BioWare lost out there. That person is extremely good at what they do, and it sucks that they're not there anymore because they should have been. The funny thing was that blog was good news if you're someone who's hoping the next game comes out, but it was obviously mired by the layoffs and people being permanently moved against their will. So that's where we're at. This I talked about still wanting Shepard in the next Mass Effect. I've made that argument multiple times. I kind of combine that with this next Mass Effect, what happens now. This was just kind of a recap, I believe. This is when here about 4 months ago, they started doing hiring again. This is for a senior technical artist job. I'm a big promoter of the idea that any news is good news if it isn't layoffs for BioWare and Mass Effect at this point. This was an example of that. Here we had Shepard as a new protagonist. This was me just kind of talking about the pros and cons of bringing Shepard back, of having a new protagonist, and maybe a combination of both of those, which I still, have some feelings about. I really enjoyed making this video, even though it wasn't all that popular, about how Andromeda was just too early. Andromeda, the game, if you think about the concept of it, is a game that would have made a lot of sense to come after the next Mass Effect, after a sequel to 3, or another trilogy or whatever, to then say, hey, what happened to these people who took off before the Reaper War? Let's go explore that now. Instead, Andromeda, to me, even to this day, still kind of feels like them being like, we don't want to deal with the what we sowed at the end of the trilogy. We don't have to deal with those endings and all of that stuff. So we're just gonna go somewhere completely different and make up the story that doesn't actually make any sense about how this even happened. I just feel like Andromeda was rushed, and the idea of it is pretty cool in the natural progression of the Mass Effect franchise, but it was just done too haphazardly and too early. But yeah, that's just me. This Mass Effect over Dragon Age, David Gator, believe it or not, works at another studio and has for a decade. He's kind of an OG BioWare dev, writer, mostly focused on Dragon Age, and he makes sure his opinion is known every time it can get him some clicks, to basically dunk on BioWare, and especially to dunk on Mass Effect. He does work at another studio. He founded the studio, I think, in Australia, and they supposedly have released games, but you wouldn't know it if you pay attention to his presence online. This is where he had pointed out that it always felt like Mass Effect kind of got the preferential treatment from EA, that they always got everything they needed, where the Dragon Age team had to scrap and do what they had to do. His big argument for that, if I remember correctly, was that Dragon Age has technically sold more copies than Mass Effect, and that means that should have gotten more of the attention and funding and all of that. I've pointed out that stat is like kind of skewed because the trilogy came out in a time where games just didn't sell as much as they do now. And then Andromeda wasn't a huge success, even though it actually sold okay from what I've seen. And then the sales for Dragon Age, the reason it's higher is basically just Inquisition. And Inquisition came at a time after the trilogy, where that's when gaming just got bigger. That's when the industry had grown quite a bit, and games just sold more, and it was a hit. People liked it, at least at the time. People don't seem to like it as much now, but that's a different video. So that whole argument was kind of to me annoying, and my whole point to a point was, even if Dragon Age is technically the higher selling franchise over the years, I don't think it's the one that's the most culturally relevant, even today, especially. I just don't think, and I think the Veilguard, to a point, even though it had multiple issues around it, kind of showed that, maybe that technically is the bigger franchise. It doesn't seem to matter when a game actually came out. So that's what that was about. This BioWare, the big management change. There was someone, I can't remember off the top of my head, that was a longtime OG dev at BioWare who's now in charge of, not Gary McKay, who's like the CEO of BioWare, but basically like the step down, the studio manager, I believe. And it happened real quietly. They never announced anything. I'm not aware that someone left, so I don't know if they were replacing someone or if it was a new position, but I remember that being a pretty big deal. This video here is one of my favorite ones I've made, and it's the one I've gotten the most views on in the last year or so. It was BioWare's community problem and how BioWare has this issue, and it's why I think it's good that they are probably doing this campaign to make Mass Effect relevant again. That one of the big issues they have is that a lot of BioWare fans, from what I've learned over the last 4 years, is there's definitely two groups of fans. There's Dragon Age fans and there's Mass Effect fans, and there's crossover for sure. But there's the most vocal parts of those communities. There is not a crossover, and there is a very real chunk of the community, and it's probably not that big, but it's big enough, and it's very vocal, that no matter what BioWare does next, no matter how good Mass Effect is, that there's going to be a big chunk of people who appear to be their own fans, their own community, who are going to dunk on Mass Effect and hate it. People who are upset and mad about Dragon Age, whether it's reasonable or not. The fact that the next game is not a Dragon Age game is going to be a no-go for a lot of these people, and they're going to be very vocal about it. Some of these people are relatively big content creators in the Mass Effect BioWare sphere, and a lot of them are just really passionate fans, right? And I don't blame people for being upset because it looks like Dragon Age is probably on the rocks, maybe a dead franchise. We'll have to see in the long run. It probably depends a lot on how the next Mass Effect does. But this is just a conversation about how, I think if people want another Dragon Age game one day, I would at least advise them to be fairly neutral on what happens with the next game with Mass Effect, because I doubt they're going to hand that franchise off to another studio. I doubt they're, basically BioWare needs to have a big comeback, be able to grow as a studio again and become a 2-game studio again. If anyone wants Dragon Age again, and dunking on the next Mass Effect game, whether you like it or not, just because of it's the principle of it, probably not going to help you. So that was a fun one. Here, there's another hiring listing I did here for a senior animator. So that makes 3 jobs in the last year, which, keep in mind, there was like a 2-year drought where they didn't hire for Mass Effect at all. So I talked about another new job there. BioWare gutted, Dragon Age of Veilguard debacle. There were a bunch of kind of clickbaity stories that were coming out around this time, but a month, 2 months ago, where they were really trying to portray like Dragon Age as this like complete failure. It didn't sell that well, but it reviewed really well. And even EA has said that they're really happy with how it reviewed. They just wish it would have sold better. BioWare being gutted, I guess, like this is this video was about. Me being like, this all seems a little sensational, but whatever. And then I did one about this was when we found out, and there were some statements about I think it wasn't a blog, it was maybe some articles or something about BioWare being a Mass Effect studio. This was when Mark Dara did his video, that's right, where he said basically BioWare appears to be a Mass Effect studio now. They're going to need to hire more people, and they're probably going to use co-developers to make the next game. And that we'll probably see them start ramping up for both of those things soon. My prediction has been that we'll see the next Mass Effect be made similarly to the next Battlefield game, which has 4 studios working on it. And we'll probably see a studio like EA Motive, who's currently working on Iron Man and Battlefield 6. I bet we'll see them release Iron Man in the next year or so, and we'll see them become a co-dev for Mass Effect. That's just my prediction. That's especially because a lot of the people who were moved from BioWare to other studios were moved to Motive. Here we had the Mass Effect fans need to prepare for the game's relevance campaign. This is what I was talking about before, where I've been talking a lot about how BioWare EA are going to have to make Mass Effect matter as an IP, as a franchise, in the general media sphere again. One way they're going to do that is by doing a show on Amazon that we've been getting more details about. And there was a bunch of people having a hissy fit over a tweet that or an Instagram post from John Cena like years ago that was retweeted recently, and people were freaking out about it. Well, if John Cena's part of this, it's gonna suck, or whatever their point was. One, I don't think he's gonna be part of this project, and 2, people need to be ready for anything, and that's kind of what that whole video was about. And then, just a couple weeks ago, I did this video about how Mass Effect 5's development is going to depend on Battlefield 6 a lot, the success of 6, how this co-developer situation works out for that game, and if they use it on others, which I think they will. That's what that was all about. And then just a couple days ago, I released this video about them, BioWare hiring a lead level designer for Mass Effect 5, and that kind of catches us up. So if you're still sticking with me, that's been the last year. Those are all the videos I've made, and I think it encapsulates most of the news or kind of conversation around the next Mass Effect game that's been happening. I'm hopeful. In the next couple months, we'll be doing my big recap video of the last 5 years, my prediction videos for N7 Day. Obviously, if any news or hirings or anything happens between now and N7 Day, I'll cover that. I have a podcast called the Mass Effect Hypecast, which I only do a couple episodes a year at this point. That will obviously pick up as we get closer to the launch of the game, to more information coming out, and so on and so forth. I expect this year's N7 Day to be pretty big, mostly because last year's was basically non-existent, and to know that for the last year or so, the bulk of those developers have been back on Mass Effect, that they've had time to do that, that they have time to do assets, and there should just be stuff for them to talk about this year that there probably just wasn't last year. And I'm not expecting things like the title of the game or a release date or anything. I think those things, they probably don't know them yet, or if they do, they aren't ready to reveal it. And then especially after Dreadwolf changed the Veilguard so late in development, they may be kind of unwilling to name the next Mass Effect too early because they don't want to do that again, because that probably hurt the game a little bit. But they're hiring. They're hiring more consistently in the last 6 months than they have for the last 3 years. It's still not the big hiring push I would expect to see as they begin or right before they start full production. I would expect a much larger list on their careers website. But maybe that won't happen if they're going to use co-developers, if they're going to use other studios to come help them. Maybe they, the prediction right now is that, a couple of years ago, BioWare was around 400 to 500 employees. It's probably down to the 200 to 300 range now. And that's about the size you need for one game. Especially if you're going to get co-developer help from, EA studios or even outside contractors. So I'm excited for the rest of this year. Obviously, I've got other things I care about when it comes to gaming and my own life as well. But I'm definitely looking forward to N7 Day because I think we'll get something substantial. I don't think it's going to be the big giant blowout or the huge info dump that we'll probably get in a year or two from now. But I do think it'll be exciting. I think it'll be worth actually streaming this time and doing that whole thing. And so we'll have to wait to see about that. This year, when it comes to doing like guests and stuff like that, I don't have the same relationships I did a year ago. So we'll probably just do our own thing this year. And I think that's going to be okay. So I would like to do a recap this year with N7 Legend again. We didn't do it last year because there was like nothing to talk about. So we'll have to see how that goes. And yeah, that's kind of what I have. So if there's any info I missed, please leave it down in the comments. Let me know. I'm happy to check it out. If you're excited about N7 Day or however you're feeling, let me know down in the comments. Subscribe to the channel if you want more Mass Effect info, news, speculation, all that stuff, or just any gaming content in general. Hit the like button so more people see the video. Consider becoming a YouTube member if you want videos like this one just a hair early, and to support the things I'm doing here. If you want to see other ways to support and check out my other content, look down in the description of the video for all those links. That is all I have for this one. So until next time.